Good afternoon, everyone. I feel very privileged to extend my warm welcome to all presented here. Today, we are here to mark another landmark of success by celebrating the 75th Independence Day of our beloved country, India. Thousands laid down their lives so that our country breathed this day. Never forget their sacrifice. This feeling of patriotism for our country binds us as citizens, and we must cherish this unseen thread of love. August 15 surely matters a heaven for each and every citizen of India. We are witnessing the golden days just because of the sacrifice our ancestors made. Today, India is a democratic country and is making a huge achievement in various fields such as sports, education, business, and so on. So once again, I welcome you all to this beautiful and wonderful evening on behalf of Parvas of Providence Women's College, Department of Mathematics and Statistics. As you know, today in connection with Platinum Jubilee of Indian Independence, we are gathered here for the talk on role of women in nation building in India in 21st century by retired Group Captain E.R. Rajapan Sir, ex-United Nations staff and MD Shivayu Aerospace. I am profusely elated to take an opportunity to introduce our chief guest of the day. Group Captain E.R. Rajapan Sir is an IAF veteran with more than 3 decades of services. He was on the faculty of the only air power think tank in India called the Center of Air Power Studies in New Delhi from 2009 to 2010. And during this time, he published many articles and presented many papers on air power strategic matters and airport planning and operations. He also served the United Nations in DR Congo during the Congo crisis, and while there, he was the chief editor of Kindu Times, a quarterly magazine dedicated to the history and civilization of DR Congo. Post-retirement, he started Shivayu Aerospace, a company engaged in manufacturing spares for Boeing aircraft and ISRO satellites. Shivayu Aerospace has been named as one of the best 10 aerospace company in India by Industry Outlook and has also been featured in Aeromag, an international aerospace and defense magazine. Rajapan Sir is a prolific writer, a motivational speaker, a thinker and a leadership coach. As an ex-military officer with an extreme love for his nation, he is active on social media and has written many posters about social issues like overcoming the pandemic and the Air India Express crash that happened last year. Through the posters, he makes aware about the need to get vaccine and concerns about the lives that have been lost due to corona and the happening economic recessions. He also mentions about the increased unemployment rate since the onslaught of COVID-19. He has also admired the central government moves to combat COVID. And in his post related to Air India Express crash happened last year, he mentions about the reason of the accident and the precautionary measures taken since the accident and all other steps that have been taken to ensure the safe landing of aircrafts. Also, he shows his concerns about the delay in the finalization of the aircraft accident investigation and delaying the implementation of preventive measures to avoid such accidents at this and other airports in the country. So going through his posters, we will get a detailed idea about the current issues, and as a true nationalist and a nation builder, he aims to reach out to students and the youth to contribute towards nation building. So I extend a warm welcome to you, sir, for gracing this event with your presence. So without further ado, let's begin the program. To seek the blessing of the Almighty, I now call upon Sonal Preet for the prayer.
കാണായ ലോകങ്ങൾ കാക്കുന്ന ദേവ കാരുണ്യ സിന്ധു നമിക്കുന്നു നിന്നെ കരളിന്റെ പൂക്കൾ നിൻ പാദതാരിൽ കാണിക്ക വെച്ചു നമിക്കുന്നു നിന്നെ കാണായ ലോകങ്ങൾ കാക്കുന്ന ദേവ കാരുണ്യ സിന്ധു നമിക്കുന്നു നിന്നെ കരളിന്റെ പൂക്കൾ നിൻ പാദതാരിൽ കാണിക്ക വച്ചു നമിക്കുന്നു നിന്നെ ലോക സമസ്ത സുഖിനോ ഭവന്തു ഈ മന്ത്രമീ ലോകമെന്നും ക്ഷീണമേനി.
Thank you, Sonal. Now I invite the very liable person of our department, our Association Secretary, Ms. Arya Manohar, for the welcome speech.
Greetings of the day to one and all present here. 15 August 2021 marks the 75th year of Indian independence. It's a day of celebration for all and for the nation. The 75th Independence Day in India is an important day in history as it's known all over as Bharat Ka Amrit Mahotsav. It is a great honor for me to pronounce that today we are joined by Group Captain E.R. Rajapan sir to learn and understand more about our nation and the role of women in nation building. Group Captain E.R. Rajapan has served in the Indian Air Force for more than 3 decades. He was a scholar at India's premier air power think tank, the Distinguished Center for Air Power Studies. Following his retirement, he found Shivayu Aerospace in Bangalore, which is today an AS9100 and ISO 9001 aerospace and defense company. Several good service entry awards have been bestowed upon him. In 2003, IAF honored him as the best air traffic service provider. In 2017, he retired from the IAF and began his second career as an entrepreneur in the aerospace and defense industry. He is motivated by a strong desire to serve the nation in and out of uniform. He has given presentations in several colleges throughout Karnataka and Kerala in order to pursue his vocation. He is a multi-talented individual who is as sharp as a tiger. He is an ardent golfer, a thinker, a prolific writer, a leadership coach, a motivational speaker, a business development coach, a fitness and sports fanatic, a mentor, and much more. Sir, there's much we can learn from you. We are truly honored to have you here, and we could not have asked for a more fitting main guest for this occasion. With all due respect, I welcome you, sir. Now, I welcome the cheerleader of the Department of Mathematics, Providence Women's College, Ms. Aishwarya Paul. She never fails to inspire and motivate us despite our indolence, for she is the head of the Department of Mathematics. I welcome you, ma'am, with all utmost regards. Let me wholeheartedly welcome all the intellectuals, faculty, and students present here. Thank you.
Thank you, Arya. Now I request Ms. Aishwarya Paul, HOD of the Mathematics Department, to give the presidential address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Alisha. Good evening, one and all. Respected Chief Guest of the Day, Group Captain Dr. E.R. Rajapan sir, all other teachers present here, and dear students. Sir, since you are new to our college, I wish to give you a brief of our college and the department. Being the first women's arts and science college in the Malabar region of Kerala, Providence Women's College was established in 1952 by the Apostolic Carmel Congregation for a better translation of love, concern to the poor, and the faith in divinity. Celebrating the 70th anniversary this year, we have launched 2 new, very updated programs, which are the integrated MA in IR and Politics and BA HRM, thus accounting for a total of 15 departments, 4 of which are research centers, 7 PD departments, and the rest UG departments. Mathematics being taught from the beginning of the college itself, it was established as a UG department of Mathematics and Statistics in 1981 and upgraded with PG recently in 2014. With a vision, realize your potential, the department concerns with developing the ability of the students to think critically, creatively, strategically, and logically through various webinars, workshops, value education classes, academic and cultural programs, and certificate courses too, like introducing LaTeX programming, R programming, Jamovi, Python, etc., who has to take students to new vistas of umpteen multidisciplinary possibilities of subjects. We have 7 faculties and 108 students as of now, which might go up to 170 students when the first year PG and UG admissions are done. Talking about our students, we have a very vibrant batch here and who are very prudent, so that they take up responsibilities of any social or political issue that arises around and conduct awareness programs on them. Their best practices accounts to reading books to the visually impaired and social service through orphanages, old age homes, and lesser privileged schools. So now that we are equipped with a very versatile batch of women, we need to make them strong enough to come out of the nutshell that they feel, so that they fly high to better heights, taking with them their nation also. In this 75th year of Indian independence, too, India remains a developing country, COVID pulling us down even more. That is why we have here the best person that we could get, Group Captain E.R. Rajapan, sir. And you have heard so much about him now, but there is more that you need to know about, sir. Reading his Facebook post has given me or made me more thoughtful of in what a pathetic situation our country is, whether it is in the social or in the economic or in the civil scenario. Let us hear more about our country and what we young women can do in this scenario from Rajapan sir itself. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we will move on to the main part of the event, the part everyone has been waiting for. So I kindly invite Group Captain E.R. Rajapan sir for the talk. Over to you, sir.
Thank you indeed for a very, very beautiful introduction. It's a privilege. Good evening, Principal Sister Jessina Joseph, students, teaching and non-teaching staff of Providence College. It is indeed a great pride and privilege for me to address you all on a topical subject, role of women in nation building in the 21st century of India. In the webinar organized by the college as part of Bharat Ka Amrit Mahotsav. I'm extremely thankful to the principal for giving me, an Air Force veteran, an opportunity to share my thoughts on a very apt subject from a nationalistic and nation-building perspective. At the outset, I would like to compliment the Providence Women's College for a stellar service it has been rendering since 1952. In the Malabar region, Providence College is a pioneer in imparting undergraduate and postgraduate level education to girls. Thanks to the liberal and cheap fee structure, even girls from the lower strata of the society also could afford higher education and get employment, making them financially independent and get great respect from the society. Providence College's contribution in women empowerment is really laudable. Through the regimen of strict discipline, high academic standards, and extracurricular activities, make every student of your college a conscientious citizen and a well-developed personality in the service of the nation. My heartiest felicitations to the teaching and non-teaching staff of the college for the great service you are rendering to the nation. I also would like to take the names of some of the luminaries of your college. Anna Rajaram, the first woman IAS officer in India, Anjali Menon, Neena Kurup, and Tulasi Radhakrishnan for making the college famous. You may feel it is information overload, but certainly not. What I'm sharing with you is highly refined knowledge and a prescription for making India a great power in the coming years. In today's talk, I shall cover the topic under the following headings: the history and greatness of our country and its civilization, the journey of Indian civilization, India's contribution to the world, the invasion and destruction of India's culture and heritage, India's independence struggle and the role of women, India's progress in independent India, India's rise in 21st century, India's goals in the coming decades, and finally, the role of women in nation building in 21st century India. As India celebrates its 75th year of independence, it is imperative for us to understand the greatness of our civilization and culture. Even though India has many religions, we are all descendants of historic India, which covered today's four nations: India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan. Please do not be under the impression that I am trying to spread Hinduism, but my sole aim is to instill the sense of nationalism, country first attitude. Only when we know about a great heritage and culture, then only we can feel proud as Indians. And this realization and internalization only will propel us to work hard to redeem our lost glory. The common knowledge in India about the vintage of our history is just 7,000 years old. This is a distorted history. In fact, India's civilization is the oldest in the world. According to historians, the Indian civilization is the oldest and dates back to 73,000 years. All the major civilizations in the world, such as Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, Egyptian, Maya, which is South America, Chinese, Greek, Persian, and Roman, none of them is older than 7,000 years. According to the Searcher study on genetics and anatomy, modern humans first arrived on the Indian subcontinent from Africa between 73,000 and 55,000 years ago. However, the earliest non-human remains in India date back only to 30,000 years ago. Kalpa Vigraha, a Hindu idol now in the custody of US, is 28,450 years. Just incredible. The vintage of this idol was determined by CIA through radiocarbon dating, and therefore the antiquity of the idol can be believed. An exquisitely carved brass idol weighing just 47.5 grams is the oldest artifact in the world. The idol is a credible evidence of the metallurgy existed as far as back 30,000 years ago in India. The modern civilization of settled life, which involves the transition from foraging to farming and pastoralism, began in India around 7,000 years ago. By 4,500 BC, settled life had spread more widely in India and began to gradually evolve into Indus Valley civilization. This civilization flourished between 2500 BC and 1900 BC in what today is in Pakistan and northwestern India, and is also known as for its urban planning, baked brick houses, elaborate drainage, and water supply, etc. Irrespective of religion, we Indians can be really proud of our civilization, which is the oldest in the world. Then Indian history and culture can be divided broadly into 12 phases. First, the prehistoric period up to 70,000 BCE, the Paleolithic period from 70,000 to 10,000 BCE, Mesolithic period from 10,000 to 8,000, Neolithic period from 8,000 to 2,700 BC. Indus Valley civilization, which is mostly known to the world, is from 2,700 to 1,900 BCE. Mauryan era, India was ruled by the Mauryans from 324 BCE to 187 BCE, followed by Sangam era from 300 BCE to 380. Gupta Empire ruled India from 380 to 800 AD. The medieval Indian history starts from 700 AD and ends by the arrival of the British, 1857 AD. The British era started from 1858 until the independence. In the prehistoric period up to 70,000 BC, the first inhabitants who came to the Indian subcontinent were Nagas in the northeast, Sandalas in the East India, Bhils and Gonds in Central India, and Todas in South India. Next is the Paleolithic period from 70,000 to 10,000 BC, during which the people started living in caves and started using fire. Next phase is the Mesolithic period from 10,000 BC to 8,000 BC. People started domesticating the animals and cattle rearing. From 8,000 to 2000 BC, in the Neolithic period, was the golden era in the Indian history. Languages developed, wheels were invented, cities were planned, proper houses were made, irrigation was available for cultivation, tools and agricultural implements were made, settlements and kingdoms and spiritualism, etc. evolved. Indus Valley, the cradle of Indian civilization, was established in 3,300 BC and disappeared around 1400 BC. Next was the Iron Age between 1500 and 200 BCE. During this period, basic books of Hinduism were written, Vedas were composed, and two major religions, Jainism and Buddhism, were also evolved. During this period, Greek king Alexander the Great invaded India. The Mauryan era from 324 to 187 BC was ruled by two great kings, Chandragupta and Ashoka. And they ruled major parts of India, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, and present-day Bangladesh. The next phase in Indian history was the Sangam age, which we are all very familiar about, started from 300 BC and ended in 300 AD, during which Chola, Cheras, and the Pandyas ruled South India. Subsequently, the Gupta Empire which mostly ruled northern India, was from 300 AD to 800 AD. And their kingdom was spread all over North India, and Samudragupta was the strongest of the Gupta kings. He is also referred to as the Indian Napoleon. Next phase in the Indian history is the early medieval period, which began after the end of the Gupta Empire and lasted till 1200 AD. The rise of the Delhi Sultanate in northern India and Chola spreading its territory into Sri Lanka, Maldives, part of Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, all happened during this period. During this period, India's territory included many parts of Southeast Asia also. The next phase, late medieval period, started from 1200 AD to 1526. This is marked by the rule of Muslim dynasties of Turkic, Turco-Indian, and Pathan origins. It ruled large parts of Indian subcontinent from the 13th century to the early 16th century. In the south, the Vijayanagar dynasty ruled at that time, with its capital in Hampi in Karnataka from 1336 to 1646. The next phase in Indian history started with the arrival of Europeans. And with their arrival, though for the trade, but was also followed with the flag, which led to India's decline and enslavement. The first country which sent a trade team to India was Portuguese, and its captain Vasco da Gama landed at Kozhikode, your own very city, in May 1498. Since then, the Dutch, the Netherlands, the Danish, the Denmark, the French came for trade and established trade centers and took over control of ports and along the west and east coast of India. East India Company, established by the English, started trade with India in 1612 and set up their trade centers in Bombay, Madras, and Bengal provinces in the next few years. In order to protect the trade, the East India Company started building its private army comprising of Indian soldiers and British officers. And over the years, their private army strength reached almost 1 lakh, making the biggest troops in India. The military arm of the East India Company quickly developed into a private corporate armed force and was used as an instrument of geopolitical power and expansion instead of its original purpose as a guard force. Because of this, the East India Company became the most powerful military in the Indian subcontinent. But the first Indian rebellion, which took place in 1857, broke out in the Meerut cantonment, had sent shockwaves to the British Kingdom, and the British Crown took over the control of EIC territories from 1858 and continued to rule India till 1947. Until the invaders came, India was the richest country in the world. India's wealth was looted for many centuries. The looting started with the Greek king Alexander in the 4th century BC, Arabs in 8th, and in the ensuing 12 centuries by Turk, Mongol, Timur, Genghis Khan, Portuguese, Dutch, Danish, French, and finally the English. By the end of the 18th century, India's share of world trade was a staggering 27%, and when the British left India in 1947, the share dropped to a mere 4%. In 74 years, our world trade has further dropped to 1.67%. Should we not become an export-oriented economy like China, which enjoys 14.7% of the world trade? Let me now talk about India's contribution to the world. In my personal opinion, the greatest contributions of India to the world are, first, the vision of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, meaning world is one family. And the second, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, meaning let the entire world be happy. The Vedas and Upanishads written by the Indian sages are the oldest religious and spiritual teachings, and the essence of these teachings is being imbibed by the world population, and they bring peace and tranquility to the humankind. No other civilization or nation could ever think of such universal brotherhood and inclusive happiness. Let me now share with you some of the important contributions of India to the world. Sanskrit language, the oldest Indian language, is also the mother of all European languages. You all now know that Sanskrit is the most suitable language for computing. Next, the educational institution, Takshashila in Peshawar in Pakistan was established in 700 BCE. Look at the enormity of this university, which was even bigger than today's Massachusetts Institute of Technology in US. It had 300 lecture halls, laboratories, a library, and a towering observatory for astronomical research. Chinese traveler Hian Sang wrote in his diary that it had 10,000 students and 200 professors. Can you imagine? Such a university existed 700 years below the Christ came to India, before the Christ came to India. Another university, Nalanda University, was one of the greatest centers of learning in the world from the 6th century to 1200 AD. The numeral 0, although the Babylonians used to zero signify the absence, Indians were the first to use the 0 as a symbol and an arithmetic operation. So you can well understand if the decimals, if the numeral 0 did not exist, then how would have been the mathematics? Just can't think of it. Next, Ayurveda. The holistic treatment and surgery started in 6th century BC. The game of chess, now popular in the world and known in India as Chaturanga, also originated in India around 280 AD. Yoga, the physical, mental, and spiritual practices aimed at controlling and stilling the mind and recognize the detached witness consciousness as untouched by the activities of the mind and mundane sufferings, also originated in India. We all now know that 21st June is still being celebrated as the World Yoga Day all over the world. Metallurgy, smelting of metals, started in 4th century BC in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, which was unknown to the world then. Bhaskaracharya, great mathematician of India, rightly calculated the time taken by the Earth to orbit the Sun as 365.25875648 days. Can you just imagine the accuracy which he has calculated when none of this scientific equipment were available to him? This happened in 7th century, hundreds of years before the astronaut Smart could predict this. Value of pi, algebra, trigonometry, and calculus are also the contributions of Indian mathematicians. Number 10 to the power of 53 were developed as early as 5,000 years back. What an astonishing thing. The present day scale or the ruler, the measuring scale, was developed in India in 2400 BC. Some of the rulers were even calibrated to 1/16th of an inch, less than 3 millimeters. Let's look at the accuracy of the measurements the Indians had mastered 2400 years back. Astronomy was developed as a discipline of Vedanga, or one of the auxiliary disciplines of the associated with the study of Vedas during 1500 BC. Astrology or Jyotisham is again one of the Vedanga, the 6 auxiliary disciplines used to predict people's future based on the study of the position of celestial bodies at the time of birth of the person. Buddhism and Jainism religion also originated in India. Frescograph, a device for measuring the growth of plants, was also invented in India by Sir Jagdish Chandra Bose. And all of us operating the computers, you know the importance of USB for transferring the data. Again, this was also invented by an Indian, Ajay V. Bhatt. Greatness of India and Indian civilization could be gauged from the saying of some of the great peoples of the world. Let me first quote Albert Einstein. I quote, "We owe to the Indians who taught us how to count, without which no worthwhile scientific discovery could have been made." I also quote Mark Twain. I quote, "India is the cradle of human speech and the mother of history. Our most valuable and most instructive materials in the history of man are treasured up in India." These words truly sum up the greatness and spirit of great India. Having talked about India's history, civilization, and its contribution to the world, let me now cover the Indian independence struggle. The Indian independence movement was a series of historic events with the ultimate aim of ending British rule in India. The trigger was the revolt of 1857, or popularly known as the Sepoy Mutiny. The Indian independence struggle lasted for 90 years from 1857 to 1947. The first nationalistic revolutionary movement for Indian independence emerged from Bengal and later took root in the newly formed Indian National Congress, with a prominent moderate leader seeking only their fundamental right to appear for civil services examinations in the British India first. And thereafter, they also wanted more economic rights for the people of the soil. The early part of the 20th century saw a more radical approach towards political self-rule proposed by leaders such as Lal Pal Bal, the famous triumvirate, Aurobindo Ghosh, and V.O. Chidambaram Pillai. With the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi to India and under his leadership, the independence struggle was mostly non-violent. Yet in this 90-year period, 3.5 crores Indians lost their lives in the fight against British and the famine caused by the British. Let me now talk about the role played by women in our freedom struggle. Without the contribution of women freedom fighters, India could not have won independence. Let me now mention some of the fiery women freedom fighters who were much more courageous and assertive than many freedom fighters. The first freedom fighter's name comes to my mind is Rani Lakshmi Bai, the Queen of Jhansi, who sacrificed her life fighting the British forces. She will always be remembered for her bravery and valor as a warrior. In her fight against the British forces in Gwalior Fort, she realized that she would be captured. Instead of surrendering, she preferred to embrace death and committed suicide by jumping from the rampart of Gwalior Fort. I had visited Gwalior Fort and the rampart from where Rani Lakshmi Bai jumped to martyrdom. It requires great courage to jump from more than 100 meters height in the base of the fort. No wonder even today, crores of girls and women see her as the ultimate courage fighter, and she will ever remain as the inspiration for generations to come. Another brave woman warrior who participated in the battle against the British was, along with Rani Lakshmi Bai, was Jalkari Bai. She served in the women's army of Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi. At the height of the siege of Jhansi, she disguised herself as the queen and fought on her behalf from the front, allowing the queen to escape safely out of the fort. She also played an important role in the rebellion in 1857. The other prominent women freedom fighters who fought against the British rule include Kasturba Gandhi, Kamala Nehru, Sarojini Naidu, Sucheta Kripalani, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, Rani Channamma, Captain Lakshmi Sehgal, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, and Aruna Asfali, etc. But many others not so famous also fought to obtain freedom for us. The unsung women freedom fighters also include Begum Hasrat Mahal, Mahadevi Verma, Matangini, Moolmati, Durgabai Deshmukh, Tararani Srivastava, Savitribai Phule, Bikaji Kama, Kanagalata Barua, and Uma Devi of Kudda. In addition to these prominent women freedom fighters, there were many lax, unknown, valiant women freedom fighters who became martyrs or suffered serious injuries fighting the British during the independence struggle. We, the citizens of India, have forgotten these unsung freedom fighters. What a sordid story of ungratefulness. Our current generation is more fancied by the film heroines and music celebrities. What a pity and shame. Let me now talk about Kerala's women freedom fighters. How many of us know and remember our famous Akkammachariyan, Rosamma Punnus, and Ammu Swaminathan? They and many other unsung women participated in the freedom struggle and gave away their little ornaments for financing the freedom fight. Our Malayali women freedom fighters are also in the forefront when it came to fighting British. Many women from all walks of life also were at the forefront of the momentous people's struggle in Travancore in the pre-independence era to oust C.P. Ramaswamy, who wanted to retain Travancore as an independent state. Akkammachariyan was at the forefront of the march against the tyrannical C.P. Ramaswamy, and to the Travancore police, she shouted, and I quote, "I am the leader, shoot me first before you kill others," unquote. How many of our present women leaders in Kerala have this kind of courage and purpose? I exhort you, the young women of Kerala, to muster courage and to cleanse the rotten political system and governments. Another name comes to my mind is Rosamma Punnus, Akkammachariyan's own sister, who passed away not so long ago in 2013, was also an independence activist and was the first person to be sworn in as the member of Kerala Legislative Assembly. How many of us know about Rosima Punnu's contribution to Kerala politics? How many remember us? Another prominent woman freedom fighter from Kerala was Ammukutti Swaminathan. Her story is truly amazing. Born in Ponnani and without any formal education in the childhood, but later became a scholar in English, thanks to her husband, Subbamma Swaminathan. She was influenced by Mahatma Gandhi and his freedom movement. Living a very comfortable life in London, where she was staying with her husband, she came to India for full-time participation in the freedom struggle. Her selfless service and deep knowledge in Constitution endeared her to the top leaders of the Congress, and the Constitution of India was to be, when the Constitution of India was to be drafted, they appointed Ammukutti Swaminathan as a member of the Constitution of the Assembly of India. What a pride for Malayalis. It is indeed a pride for every Malayali that Ammukutti Swaminathan was born in Kerala. Yet, if you ask our current generation of women politicians how many are influenced by Ammukutti, the answer will surely disappoint you. Where is the time for them to elevate it from petty politics to developmental politics and nation building? Therefore, I exhort you all to take a place that you will surely read about the struggle of our women freedom fighters and will tell their sufferings and sacrifices for getting us the freedom to our children. Otherwise, we will be failing in our duties towards our freedom fighters who sacrificed their life for our freedom of today. It is also important for us to remember and pay tribute to our great women who contributed significantly in making our country strong politically, economically, and technologically. Let me now talk about a few great women who shaped the destiny of India. The first name, obviously, is Indira Gandhi. She is remembered as one of the best prime ministers of India and brought prosperity and glory for the nation. Her contribution in making India strong in the international arena, to me, is her biggest achievement. Alleviating poverty through green revolution, controlling inflation and generating employment, economic progress, liberating Bangladesh, and deaf to foreign relations are some of her other major contributions. Mother Teresa, though not born in India, she dedicated her life to take care of the poor and the leprosy patients. She was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize from India in 1979. Andhani Gopal Joshi, India's first female doctor, who became a role for model Indian female doctors, is going to be revered and respected. Anasuya Sarabhai, a social worker and a trade union leader, lived from 1885 to 1972. Another notable Kerala lady, Justice Anna Chandi, from 1905 to 1996, was the first female judge in India as well as the Commonwealth countries. I would like to remind you about Anna Rajam Malhotra, who lived from 1927 to 2018, was the first woman Indian administrative officer. As I told you, she is an alumni of your college. Dr. Kiran Bedi is the first woman in India to join the officer rank of the Indian Police Service, a social activist and a tennis player who was the 24th Lieutenant Governor of Puducherry from 28 May to 16 February 21. Arati Saha, the first Indian and Asian woman to swim across the English Channel in 1959. Captain Prem Mathur, the first female commercial pilot, who lived from 1910 to 1992. And anybody who was associated with the aerospace would always remember Kalpana Chawla, our Indian astronaut, the first Indian woman in the space, and died tragically in the space shuttle Columbia disaster. Kamala Surya Das, again a Malayali poetess and columnist, who lived from 1934 to 2009. Though I read a book, My Story, long time back, it is so vivid in my mind. Among the Indian writers in English, Kamala Das, later Surya, earned a prominent place. M.S. Subbulakshmi, Carnatic singer, known as the Queen of Music, the second woman to receive Bharat Ratna, first Indian musician to receive Raman Magsaysay Award, often considered as Asia's Nobel Prize. Lata Mangeshkar, voice of the millennium, has sung more than 25,000 songs, much more than any singer in the world. Let me now review India's progress in the last 74 years as an independent nation. The major achievement for India is that it has remained as a vibrant democracy when many nations which became independent in the 40s and 50s plunged into military rule, dictatorship, and anarchy. The second major achievement is that India has become a power to reckon with, and along the major powers in the world are now seeking India's participation and help to resolve issues like security and peace, climate change, and maritime security, etc. And the third biggest achievement in India is it has become the third largest economy in the world in terms of purchasing power parity behind US and China. A incredible achievement. The fourth major achievement, according to me, is India became a food importing country to a food exporting country. It's a no mean achievement considering our population of 137 crores. Next is education. Improvement in literacy from a mere 12% in 1947 to 77.7% in 2021. We now have the world-class medical and engineering colleges. The IITs, the Indian Institute of Science, and IIMs are at par with the best global institutions. Indian educated executives are now managing major MNCs like Google, Microsoft, PepsiCo, Douchebang, Adobe, Diageo, Mastercard, and Cognizant, etc. It only shows how capable and the quality education which is being imparted in India. India is one of the best faring space nations, and our achievements in space application is almost at par with the US, Russia, and China. You know that we are now preparing for a manned spacecraft to moon. That is where we have reached now. In niche technology areas such as aircraft, satellite, defense equipment, and nuclear power, India is emerging as a leader. In the IT and computing field, India has emerged as a leader. If these are some of the success stories of independent India, there are many failures also. Let me now discuss our failures. First, in my opinion, is the discrimination of women. There can be no true social development unless women become equal and active participants in the development process. Unfortunately, in India, discrimination against women has been formalized through a plethora of customs, norms, and practices to protect a highly resilient patriarchal system. Dowry, discrimination in jobs, unequal pay, sexual exploitation, and lack of political opportunities are major discrimination, and they need to be removed. Highly deficient social services. The Indian government is constitutionally obliged to provide the minimum necessary services in the areas of education, health, and housing. But in each of them, it is still far from meeting its obligation to people. In spite of remarkable achievements in the fields of education and health, India's position is extremely poor even when compared with even third world countries. The next is food security. India has no doubt been successful in preventing starvation deaths in the post-independence periods. But you're also aware that until 1965, what was our food security? We had to really depend on ship comings from the US to feed US and Canada to feed our people. But the situation changed thanks to the policies of the government. Domestic production of food grains and other necessities have recorded an impressive increase, and near self-sufficiency has been reached in food production. But look at the per capita food availability when we compare with other countries of the world. An Indian gets to eat about 178 kg of grain in a year, while a US citizen consumes 1,400 kgs. We have a long way to go. Let me narrate my own personal example. When I was with the United Nations, we used to get 4,800 kilocalories of food every day. You all know that we don't need that kind of food. 2,000 to 2,500 kilocalories of food is sufficient. And what do our poor people get to eat? Not even 1,500 to 1,800 kilocalories of food. and many of them go hungry. Next, I would like to discuss corruption and lawlessness. The biggest failure of India as an independent nation has been the realm of governance. There is an all-round decline of values, a pervasive loss of accountability, and unfettered opportunity to criminals. Corruption is rampant both in high places, ministers and senior bureaucrats, and at lower levels as well. The number of scams in the independent era is huge, and the money involved is in lakhs of crores. The next issue which I would like to discuss is the widening gap between the rich and the poor in terms of their financial ability. Rich are becoming more richer and the poor are becoming more poorer. This is a major threat to the survival of our country as a democracy. While I always appreciate wealth to be generated and it can better be done by the rich people. But at the same time, this system, the government and the institutions of the country must also provide opportunities for the poor people also to enhance their income, to lead a dignified life. Is that happening in India? Certainly not. While there is a lot of hype about empowering the poor is always there in the air, but in practice, it remains as words. Next, I would like to discuss the per capita income. India, as I told you, is the third largest GDP in the world, which is roughly $3 trillion. The Chinese GDP is $15.4 trillion, and that of America is $21.8 trillion. You understand the huge difference between the third largest economy, the second largest economy, and the greatest economy, the US. We have a long way to go. Let us now look at the per capita income of the rich countries in the world, the developed countries in the world, and some of the third world countries. In the rich world countries categories, Luxembourg, which has a per capita income of about $1 lakh. Next, US and European Union countries, they have a per capita income of around $65,000. Now let's come to the third world countries like Cuba and Mexico, which have $8,500 as their per capita income. India's own neighbor, whom we consider a poor country, Sri Lanka, has got $3,600 per capita income. And do you know what is India's per capita income? It's a mere or paltry sum of $2,020. We need to do a lot to increase the per capita income, and for which all of us need to contribute. Let me now come to the last and the important part of my talk, the role of women in nation building in 21st century in India. I am a firm believer in gender equality and women empowerment. Only by empowering our women, India can undertake social engineering revolution to make the country a superpower. The women potential is grossly underutilized, and there is an urgent need for making women equal partners in nation building. The hands that rock the cradle also can rule the world. That is how the famous saying goes. In woman lies the abundant energy which can establish a paradise on earth. Let me now dwell upon the nation building and the role of women in India as the first to become a developed nation. What is nation building? Nation building is a multi-dimensional concept and involves the active participation of all its citizens in various walks of life. A strong and powerful nation is built on dedication and hard work of its individuals and planning on the part of the government. There are various facets of nation building, among which the most important ones are tapping the potential of its human resources, reducing the social and economic disparity that exists in the society, and creating and enabling an environment where an individual can live freely and transform their potential and performance. Some of the key nation building activities the women of India can contribute or indulge in are: first, to my opinion, is the increased participation of women running governments and local self-government bodies. Though there is 33% of the reservation for women candidates, seldom any political party gives this kind of representation. In order to make India a rich country, women participation in politics and corruption in public offices must cease. I exhort the women to enter politics, and only by entering political system can you change it for the better. You must have heard this saying, Gandhi, if you want to see the change, you be the change. Women in business. There are many successful business women entrepreneurs in India. Their number is minuscule as compared to men entrepreneurs. Women should now enter business in a big way in all sectors of economy: agriculture, industry, trading, services sector, and manufacturing, etc. Men entrepreneurs can finance and support daughters and siblings to start business. I am already practicing this. I supported my wife to set up and run her own trading company. More and more women should start NGOs to support women's self-group for generating jobs and undertaking developmental projects under the aegis of government and private organizations. Next is increasing role in the field of educational research. The number of women in the field of education, especially in the research institution, is far less as compared to men. Women are better teachers and researchers, so allow them to do what they are best at. The role of women in infrastructure projects. India needs to complete a lot of mega infrastructure projects, road building, railway line laying, port and airport building, digital infrastructure, warehousing and power generation, etc. Women should voluntarily seek participation in these projects. Women in manufacturing. The percentage of women in manufacturing sector is still very less. In the post-COVID-19 era, India can emerge as the manufacturing hub of the world. If that dream has to be realized, more and more women need to enter the manufacturing industry. There are many specific areas where they can do well: electronic equipment manufacturing, home appliances manufacturing, chip manufacturing, and apparel, etc. Travel and tourism is another area where women can really do well. They can provide end-to-end services in these two industries. I have listed some of the major areas for women in nation building. India plans to become 5 trillion economy by 2024. If we have to achieve this goal, women have to play a greater role to create wealth. India has the potential to make our economy even larger than China and USA. For achieving these higher levels of economic growth and social justice, women have to play a greater roles. Nari Shakti is all powerful. It's a choice of exploitation of that strength. Every woman in India needs to unleash her strength and transform her potential into performance. The role of the governments and men is to support them to exploit their full strength. In conclusion, I would like to exhort all women in India to be an integral part of its nation building. Women have the special gift of homemaking and nation building, which they can balance with a fine sense. At the end, I would like to say, Nari Shakti, Maha Shakti, let India take the best of it. And I would like to compliment and also encourage the students of your college to do well in their academics and be the contributors to the nation buildings in the coming years. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk to you, share my thoughts on this very, very topical issue. And I'm going to share this speech in written form to all of you through email, so you can read it at your own convenience. If you have missed it, noting down the points, this is one thing which you can read at your leisure at a later date. Thank you very much for patient listening from your side. And it is a time for me to answer your questions. Please go ahead, shoot.
Yes, Alisha.
We can move on to the interactive session, right, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Students, is there anything you want to clarify with sir?
First, let me ask you, was the complete speech audible to you? All of you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It
Okay, there was
was.
no interruption. Okay, good.
Yes.
So I am reminded of my school and college days. The often repeated statement was that if there are no questions, either they have understood everything or they have not understood anything at all. I do not know which one I should consider.
It's just that they are reluctant, sir. There is nothing else. Students, you can ask any question you want to, sir, because as I told you, he's one of the best personalities we could get. So,
Okay, I don't think that anybody is likely to ask or willing to ask questions. I will only say one thing, that I have shared my mobile number and also the email ID with the college authorities. If any one of you would like me to be a mentor, or if you would like to know more about the nation building, anything about the country, etc., feel free to talk to me or write to me. I'm always there to answer your queries or any of your clarifications.
thank you, sir.
Anyway, as
Students,
an offshoot or result of this one, this talk, I would like to see your college starting some program of empowerment for the women, and they should also, in a small way, start contributing towards the nation building efforts. Spending little time, okay, as they go into the civil streets after their education, etc. Probably they can spend more time, or they can take it up as a career. Nation building. I have listed a lot of areas in which the women can contribute. So that is one of them. Okay, any questions?
Good evening, sir.
Okay.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, even after 75 years of independence, we have gender issues and women being discriminated. So, according to you, what is the main reason for that?
See, traditionally, India has been a male chauvinistic society where women were, just the homemakers. So they do not have much of financial independence. And the customs of the society such that it always gave importance to the menfolk because they were the people who earned the bread. But the situation has changed. You yourself have already started seeing it. The role or the place of women in the society have changed quite considerably in the last about 25 to 30 years with the education, spread of education, and also women taking up job and becoming assertive. I have cited quite a few examples of pioneering ladies, and they took the initiative of challenging the stereotype and the traditional beliefs. So you also need to understand this one. If you want to change, you be the change. So you need to understand that there is a discrimination which is existing in India. And if you want to bring women at parity with men, nobody else will fight for you. You yourself will have to fight. So you all need to come together and understand what are those reasons. It can be local, it can be national, and it can be global also. There are many issues which are global. So you need to understand the women issues globally, at nationally, and at a local level, and make some group. Okay, it is only when you come together, the ideas can be shared and programs and policy can be made. Not necessarily that you need a platform of some political parties, etc. So it is basically the idea. So everything starts from an idea, isn't it? So you need to get that idea, spread it, and get the people to work for it. What is the leader's job? To sell that dream, to sell that idea, and make the people to buy that idea, work for the accomplishment of the idea. So you can change, and I'm seeing that change. And definitely in the next, decade or so, there will be a drastic change in the role of women in India. And I've already started seeing it. And I'm sure that by 2030 or 32, there will be a discernible change. Women will become financially independent. They will be much better educated, and they will be holding jobs in every facets of a community and job sector.
Thank you, sir.
Have I answered your question, or if you want still more clarification, I can spend more time.
That was clear, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, I could understand that you was the airport director for 3-4 years, right?
No, that has been my major job in the Indian Air Force, and I have built, maintained, and operated the airports all along my life. That is why I'm able to talk very authoritatively about the airport management and also the aviation safety.
Yes, sir. So I have heard that earlier the exams were conducted by UPSC, like the exams for entering into the airport session. But now is it privatized?
See, privatization of airport is limited to certain areas of activity. The security of the airport, the air traffic control, these are still with the government. Okay. Air traffic control is provided by the Airport Authority of India, and they have got a selection process to recruit air traffic control officers, and they are trained at their CATC center in Allahabad. So they only take engineers as air traffic controllers now, and it is a very process. And, it's a very, very challenging job. In some countries, they are paid even higher than the pilots, because the kind of the tension they will have to want to go, or stress they will have to want to go while providing the services. I, as an air traffic controller, I was responsible for the air traffic services of the Indian Air Force bases, and some of them are training bases where they operated more than 100 flights a day during day and night. And the biggest challenge for military aviation is the time for which the flights can operate. Unlike the civil flights, which has got a lot of fuel on board, the military aircraft have got very less fuel on board, because their missions demand carriage of less fuel and more of arms and ammunition. So recovering those aircraft in a very, very safe manner is a very challenging job. And I can proudly say that I have achieved that at many bases, and that is how I won the best air traffic services provider of the world. Sorry, sir, in Indian Air Force.
So my question is actually, why isn't a BSc Math student or an MSc Math student allowed to write the exam? This is actually basically presence of mind that we need, right? And I have heard that earlier these students were allowed to write exams, and now it is restricted to engineering students.
The basic, reason is that air traffic control also requires the study of all this, equipment what they are handling, the radio navigational aid equipment. They are all engineering, the machines, which generally are, operated and maintained by the engineers. So since there is a close relationship between these two, they have decided that only the engineers to be taken for this job. Not that others, even I'm not an engineer, but I became an air traffic controller. So it is only for enhancing the job proficiency and also the safety factor. The airport authority has introduced this. But if you look at it from a comparative perspective, an IAS officer can be a BSc or be a graduate, isn't it? And they can become the district collector and deal with any kind of situation. And in terms of mental ability and agility also, they are really much better as compared to some of the engineers also. So these are some of the discrepancies or discriminations which we'll have to live with. Otherwise, you file an RTI, right? Tell them that why can't others also apply for this job? Then they will give their own reasons. Okay.
I asked that because one of my uncles had retired as an airport director, and he was a BSc Math student. And that
in those days, there was no restriction. No, there was no restriction. Yeah. That is why science students could become air traffic controllers then.
Yes.
So now they have changed the selection criteria.
Yes, sir. It is actually depriving our students with some of their opportunities. Right?
I always believe in one. No, when one door gets shut, there will be 7 doors which are open. So
Yes, sir.
it is up to you which door you want to enter through, and there are innate as well as acquired qualities. Okay, every human being. So you try and exploit these qualities for other jobs as well. Don't get disheartened because you're not able to, or somebody is not able to join as an air traffic control officer. But be that it is, but you can definitely transform your potential to performance in any other field also.
Yes. Yes, sir. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Alisha, shall we continue?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, sir, for such a great session. We are really grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and provide us with such an informative session. Thank you very much. Now, let me invite Ms. Anita Pereira to present the video she has prepared for this occasion. Thank you, Anita. It was such a wonderful video. So I think we have come to the end of the event. Now I request Ms. Aradhi Krishna to propose the vote of thanks.
Good evening, all. We are highly grateful to our chief guest, Group Captain E.R. Rajapin sir, for your valuable time and for sharing your knowledge with us. We are greatly thankful to you, sir. And I would like to thank our HOD Aishwarya ma'am and all the other teachers present here. And I would also like to thank all the students who are present here and for taking initiative in organizing such a program. And I hope all of you enjoyed the section. And thank you all once again and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, Arati. So that's it. Yeah, definitely it was such a phenomenal evening. So thank you so much, everyone. Once again, thank you, sir. And thank you, everyone, for joining with us today. And thank you.
I think we can wind up the session. Thank you so much, sir, for the time and effort you have given into this program. And we shall be sending you the feedback also, sir, and we are looking forward to meet you in person also. And to your knowledge, you are from Idukki, LA, sir?
That's right.
Yes. And when you come to Kerala, please do visit our college also. We'll be looking forward to that.